Hello and welcome to Ask Lovecraft After Dark. I am joined tonight by Garett Kopczynski of Reverie Studios. And this is all very last minute. Originally, my plan tonight was just to rant about my personal experience with gaming. You guys were going to hear more about Torg than anyone should ever hear about. But I was rescued, pulled out of the fire by the fine folks at Reverie Studios, who wanted to talk about a really fascinating new project they have coming up in the spring called Eskhaton. And as someone who grew up a Southern Baptist missionary kid, anytime people start mentioning Eskhatons, I get very excited. But Garett, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm excited to do this show with you.
So can you first off tell folks about Reverie Studios, what you all are, and kind of what you've done prior to this upcoming project?
Sure. So Reverie Studios is a LARP studio or an interactive design agency. I mean, we kind of use that broad category because it doesn't necessarily mean that we stick with only LARP. And of course, LARP means live action role playing. So we do these events where you participate as the character. And it's different from a sort of traditional play. We don't have a narrative structure where there's a story that follows any sort of, path. It's really just informed by the characters and thus the participants. So Reverie Studios really kind of got started in 2016. It's myself and Ken Pickering and Tyler Brown. And we are all based out of Boston. We met through the Mind's Eye Society, which is a Vampire the Masquerade fan club. And we played locally, and then all went to Grand Masquerade, which is a sort of large convention that happens. And this was down in New Orleans. We had an opportunity to play in Participation Design Agency's end-of-the-line Masquerade LARP. And this was a Nordic-style LARP, which means that it was focused on immersion, and it was really kind of really taking away a lot of the mechanics and just focusing on the experience. This really changed everything for us. So we came away from that experience wanting to replicate that, and we started a company. So Reverie tries to do similar experiences. We have a number of LARPs that we've run now. The very first one we ran was called Seance Sessions. It's a sort of training wheels LARP. It's really geared towards people who may be interested in the experience but have never done anything like this before. You play folks who are going to a seance. And I think that, curiosity for most people who might attend like a real seance in their life, they bring their skepticism. They really might want to believe that there are ghosts, but you really can't help yourself. You want to look for where the trick is. And we allow people to explore characters who maybe aren't doing that. So there's opportunity for the story to organically grow in a direction, whether it's, a bunch of skeptics or a bunch of believers. And we just kind of let them explore that sandbox. So Seance Sessions was our very first LARP. And we also now have a cog in the machine, which is a continuity of governance LARP, which is based on this very real thing that, at least in the United States, we have. I'm sure other governments do as well. But it's a plan in case of the end of the world for a group of individuals who aren't necessarily in the governmental structure to take charge of a bunch of very challenging decisions. So we run that as well. And now the newest LARP that we have is Eskhaton. And that's the LARP that I think we're going to talk more about this evening. But it's a brand new LARP that's going to be in April of 2019. And it is Lovecraftian inspired.
All right. I as someone who has been a gamer for, a very long time, LARPing was always something that was kind of, I had a friend of a friend who did LARPing, and I'll sort of hear, at different parties and things, people talking about it. They often wore a lot of black. That's where, I often hear about LARPing and smell clove cigarettes in similar circumstances. But it was, there was something very fascinating about it, intriguing. D&D and Star Wars and the kind of the games I was doing very much got a sort of solid nerd stamp on it. And there was sort of a set of expectations as to what, kind of the gaming looked like. But this was very different, despite seeing, recognizable, this idea of, okay, you're doing a lot of the similar stuff I'm used to. You're playing a character, you've got some sort of referee, a storyteller, or a narrator, and you're playing through some kind of shared narrative experience. But the closest I ever got to actually doing it, one was when I used to game at a gaming store. We got kicked out one night because they closed, but we were so invested in this like scene that we were doing that we just finished it in the parking lot, and it was all dialogue. There was no dice rolling, there was no combat. It was just pure role playing and conversation and back and forth. And that I found really exciting and really cool. And we never played another session of it again, as happened. And then I ran a one-shot dinner party session for some players. They had found themselves, teleported to a kind of beyond the Fey wall sort of, hut. And the next session was them having a dinner party. And I invited friends of mine to play the NPCs. And it was fun. There was food. There was, again, there was a slight, extra level of extra dimensionality to it. But that's it. That's about as close as I've ever come to LARPing. And hearing my friends talk about it, for those of you who were watching last week or before, we had on Stephen Neer, who directed or wrote the play Monstrous Invisible, which is, of course, how I started playing H.P. Lovecraft. He was a hardcore LARPer, and hearing him describing LARPs, I was like, oh no, this is more than just hanging out in a parking lot or serving feta and hummus. Like they would go out, they would rent cabins or they would rent hotel spaces. There was a kind of a costume creation element to it. There was an ownership of what was going on. It was really, really fascinating. And then to start hearing about Nordic LARPs, which felt like they were moving even a step beyond that. It was, I don't know, it's really invigorating stuff. For your sort of experience with LARP, did you kind of jump right in, or did you kind of like, work your way gradually through?
Well, so my background with LARP is at about 16, it's about 15 or 16. I started to play some role-playing games, tabletop, with some friends. This was early high school, and I went to an arts high school in Sarasota, Florida called Booker. And I met a lot of very artistic human beings. And there's a sort of funnel that happens where you go from Booker to Ringling School of Art and Design. And when I was about 16, so very exciting, 15 or 16, like playing these tabletop games, new experience, really kind of getting to, portray characters and have exciting adventures and those kinds of things. My friends, had this thing that they were talking about. They said, at Ringling, they're running this live action role playing game. What is this? Now we were playing tabletop White Wolf Vampire at the time, and I believe it was a werewolf game. So it was like an adjacent game. Never played werewolf before. Never really kind of read the books. But I said, yeah, sure, it sounds interesting. So a bunch of teenagers went to this college, and we had an opportunity to play werewolf LARPing. It was terrible. It was absolutely probably one of the worst LARP experiences of my life.
Oh no!
Yeah. But it was life changing because it was like almost like I got bit by a bug. I said I didn't like it, but there was something there. It was really fascinating. And to my teenage brain, I sort of wrote it off. Like the rest of my friends were like, yeah, that was goofy. We're never going to do that again. I eventually moved north from Florida up to New Hampshire. And I sort of still had this vague conception in my head of like getting to participate in something amazing. And, I would look at videos on YouTube and read things. And there was something going on in Sweden, I think, at one point that I looked at that was very fascinating. So, that looks cool. That looks very immersive. That's what I wanted. And I met some friends in New Hampshire who would go around to conventions, and they would play, again, Vampire the Masquerade LARPs or anything like that. So I really kind of cut my teeth in that world. I participated in a couple of the Boffer LARPs, sort of the standard in the North American sphere. But it wasn't until much later when I moved to Boston where I could really kind of incorporate it into my life a little bit more, and really explore that with some friends and, develop my own material, which is what I've always wanted to do. So really it just started with a random experience. And tabletop gaming has always been there. I've always had a very core group of people that I shared those experiences with. And now as a result of LARPing, I mean, we have a company, you know, some of my very best friends are LARPers, and I'm going to be one of the groomsmen for my co-partner here at Reverie Studios. He's getting married in 2 days. So, you know, it's a very enriching life experience to have been a LARPer.
Well, and as a writer, I have to imagine that LARPing presents both sort of unique opportunities and unique challenges. You know, you've got to create the sort of a lattice work and framework for storytelling to go, but you can't really tell the story.
That's correct. And that's been an internal discussion that I've had with Ken and Tyler. So Ken comes from a Boffer world, and Tyler comes much more from the Mind's Eye Society, which is the sort of, you know, broad Vampire the Masquerade club. And the worlds that they're from are really informed by, you know, sort of modular stories. You have a story and people follow and they create characters to participate in the story. But, you know, there's a certain understanding that it's a little bit organic. You know, like if you want to explore different avenues, you're certainly welcome to. But getting them to embrace this very unfettered experience was new. You know, and I had been talking about the possibility of it for a number of years. And it wasn't until End of the Line that they really saw it pop. Like everything I said, I think really kind of crystallized for them. And the notion is that you create rich, very well detailed characters that, you know, rather than focusing so much on a central story, you just create the characters and then they'll spin off into their own arcs. And the participant is really going to make that experience for themselves. You have to kind of trust that. It's almost like you spin a top and just it goes wherever it's going to go. So it's a very different writing experience.
And I mean, is this, again, you know, when I think of gaming, I think of really kind of long form gaming, right? The sort of the weekly sessions of coming together. You have this kind of character that you either, you know, unless you're playing Paranoia or something, you know, they're sticking around for a while. And I know from my LARP friends that they'll have characters that they've been playing for years in these LARPs, you know, coming together, meeting up, you know, their regular games, and then of course their big kind of convention games. And there's a real sense of ownership with these characters. You know, there's a sense of investment. You know, it's not just, you know, numbers and you know, pencil scratchings on a sheet of paper, but it's a costume. It's mannerisms. You know, as an actor, I understand how you can kind of come to feel very possessive of a role. And it seems that there's got to be an interesting tension between that kind of long form gaming and LARPing, and then what it seems like you guys are starting to focus on, which is these more sort of short, intensive one shots. Is that true, or do you find that it's a pretty easy bleed through from one to the other? Yeah,
there's some permeability there. I think that there's experiences for everyone, and you know, certainly there are a lot of long form campaign type events out there, and people have been looking for that. You know, they want to inhabit the character for a long time. They design the character to have this arc in their mind that goes on for, you know, years potentially. And, you know, it's a very rewarding experience, you know, to see that growth and to have those kinds of stories unfold. But, you know, we really wanted to focus more on the more immediate immersion, you know, to say, okay, so we'll condense all of those things, all those dreams and visions into one jam-packed, very intense emotional experience. And that's what we aim for, because there's not a lot of that. There's some of that. It's starting to really kind of come out in the United States now. But it's much more developed over in Europe. I mean, that's why the term Nordic is kind of used, is that it originated out of the Scandinavian countries that actually were looking at what we were doing in the United States and sort of, as they say, poorly imitating it. They were making their own versions of what we were doing. And now it's kind of crossed back over, because I think sometimes we desire these much more intense experiences rather than the long form, because those, you know, sometimes life gets in the way. You may not be able to see the end of the story that you have been participating in. So these smaller form events really kind of allow you to come in, do something very deeply, and then walk away and carry that memory with you.
Well, and it's been fun to be able to participate in some of the kind of the back end developing. A friend of mine was doing he was doing a LARP based at like a medical museum, and just needed a whole whack load of characters because they were going to have a whole bunch of folks who had signed up. So, you know, sent out a request, like, just anyone, like, help me out making characters. And so I sat down, like, having to kind of like think up, all right, how would this person from like the China's space agency, you know, work? And what would his motivations be like? And it was so strange to like be like, you know, typing away furiously, trying to like come up with like, you know, a sort of an index card character, knowing that that was going to be someone's weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was going to be someone's afternoon of having to, you know, embody this, you know, Ukrainian spy. But it is, I mean, you know, these really are kind of like event weekends. You know, I think about, I don't know, one of the most famous of these big LARPs was when that company rented out or somehow got access to a battleship, and they did a Battlestar Galactica LARP.
Yes, that was one of the ones that influenced me.
And you're just seeing photos of that. And again, like, you know, I'm trying to imagine the logistics of trying to wrangle all these people, keep them from killing themselves, keep them from flooding, you know, because you know, I have a hard enough time getting, you know, the same 5 people to show up, you know, every other week to play Dungeons and Dragons. You know, the sheer logistics of bringing people to a place and having them go through an experience like this, a curated experience, you know, that's, again, sort of exists in your mind because, you know, you know, to date, you guys haven't repeated any of these, have you? Or have you starting to get to a point where you can kind of go through other stories and LARPs that you've done before?
Yeah, so we do reruns of the LARPs that we write. Actually, you get a return on investment as a writer when you run these. I mean, some groups might have different perspectives, but, you know, the way I do it is we set up a casting survey that goes out to people who are coming. They sort of go through and say, this is what I'm interested in playing. This is what I'm not interested in playing. You know, and the very first time we do it, we write all new characters. So, you know, if we have 15 or 20 participants, and there's 15 or 20 characters, all new. The second time you do it, you send out the same casting survey, and you might have characters that you can match. You might say, well, actually, this person might fit this character. So when we do reruns of the events, you might see the same character come back, and they could be, you know, gender swapped. They can have different details. It's all, you know, sort of flexible around what they're looking for. And it is interesting to see when you do have those mutations. The first time we ran seance sessions, we had a brother and sister character who were in the event. And then the second time we ran it, the same characters were sister, right? And, you know, it really kind of, you know, changed some of the dynamics, but fundamentally the story was the same because the characters are the interesting part, you know, they're core parts. And that's really the fun part about this experience as an art form is that, you know, these stories emerge and they can follow a trajectory that just takes you totally by surprise. And I've always maintained that I'm never going to be smarter or more creative or more interesting than the people who are inhabiting these characters. They're going to breathe life into them, and they're going to make these stories work.
Well, I think then that we should then jump into what's we're going to see at Eskhaton, because having, you know, listened to you talk and also having gone through and looked at what you guys are planning, it seems incredibly ambitious. So can you let the folks at home know just what Eskhaton is and how y'all are going about getting it set up?
So Eskhaton is a Lovecraftian inspired event. If you come, you are a cultist. So normally you have the perspective in these kind of cosmic horror stories where it's about a person who encounters the unknown. They're, you know, often confronted with these things that are very insurmountable, and the reality of that is difficult to deal with. So we've instead decided to invert that and focus more on these individuals who have belief as a core component of what makes their stories work. So they're in on a cosmic truth, which is that the world is going to end, right? That's a truth. It's solid. You can't change it. You can choose which outcome is going to happen. And there are, of course, different outcomes. But, you know, realistically, you have to walk that line between how much of a believer you are versus how much of a rational individual you might be. So the characters are going to kind of fall on a spectrum, I think. So if you come, you're going to be a cultist of one of 5 cults. And you might be an infiltrator. You could be, you know, an investigative journalist who joined this weird group of people. Any number of things are possible, but at the core experience, you are one of 5 cults, and they worship 5 different deities. And these deities are sort of the Lovecraftian inspired elements of, you know, these beings from other dimensions. They have terrible outcomes for us because we're sort of like ants in their world. And, you know, you have to kind of reconcile being a human being rather than sort of a faceless villain who's dealing with these truths, and you know that this is coming to pass. So how do you deal with this, right? And then we're not going to tell that story for you. We're going to let you decide the experience you're looking for. But there is a sort of a revelry that's happening because there's a satisfaction that in being right. You know, there's this maybe joy, I guess is the best way to describe it, in being around other people who all fall into the same spectrum, who are there to celebrate this coming, this, you know, this event. And we want to create a rich group of characters who might fall into this bucket and allow people to explore that experience. So Eskhaton's really kind of like the kernel of it is around that, you know, believers and truth and decisions. And, you know, we want people to make of that whatever they feel is going to be the most rewarding. And, you know, that can be all sorts of different things. Whether it's they want to do rituals and, you know, summon weird creatures that come out of the water. Okay, sure. You know, we'll make that happen. That's what we're there to provide is an experience.
Do you have a fisherman on retainer to, you know, ready to hop out of the water at a moment's notice?
Well, if people decide that's what they want to see, then yeah, we'll make that happen. And this is where it deviates a little bit from what the normal LARP experience would be. We don't have a story that we're going to tell that's like, you know, this happens and then this happens and this happens. There's a little bit of that framework, but we are more set up to say, what kind of scenes do you want? And we ask that ahead of time. Once people really kind of characters, and then, you know, also during the event, and we'll set up things. We'll set up, you know, emotional scenes. We'll set up, you know, dramatic scenes. You know, it can be everything from that dogged investigator who just follows you and won't leave you be, and you're this cultist, and he just want, you know, he shows up and he's making trouble for you. Well, okay, we'll have a confrontation. You know, if that's what you want. It's really about crafting scenes in response to what people are looking for. So we see ourselves as dream makers. You know, we make reality come into this event, and we have experience with this. We're very organized. We have a diverse background as far as a studio, and we are putting together, I think, a very robust sort of value for the ticket. And, you know, you get fed, you get hotel, you get transportation to and from the site. So we kind of think of it as more like a LARPcation. So it's like a vacation for LARPing. And then on top of it, it's in Providence. So it's right there, right outside of Providence downtown. And it's at what's called the Squantum Association in East Providence, which is how best to describe it? It's when you think about the sort of decadent New England, you know, type of person, they had a club where they would get together with a private railway that ran out of Providence, and it goes out to this place where they just ate clams. That was literally what the club was for, is they were eating clams, and it's this beautiful you know, just unbelievable sites with a private island and, you know, multiple buildings and everything. So we're lucky to have this and to be able to set it in a place that's so resonant for the material we're working with.
No, I've seen the photos, and folks should definitely go to eskhatonlarp.com. Now, that's Eskhaton spelled ESKHATON, LARP.com. Yeah, some of the location shots are absolutely beautiful. I saw this like kind of promontory, you know, this. I was like, whoa, okay, this is definitely intense. And well, that gets to what we were talking about, the logistics of it, the organizing. I mean, sort of, you know, what does it take to staff something like this to be able to really make it, you know, literally make the trains run, you know?
Yep. So the major part is ensuring, like, geez, the logistics is always make sure people are fed, make sure they're comfortable, make sure that they know what's happening. And we're all very focused on that as a studio, because you're traveling most likely from a faraway place. You want to know all the details, how to get from point A to point B. You don't want to worry about whether or not there's going to be food, or whether or not you're going to have a place to put your head down at the end of the night. So that's really what we're focused on, is we make it very easy for people to get into their costumes, portray their characters, and really kind of have this deep experience. So that's primary for us. That's really kind of the first step, is we work out the logistics of all those comfort aspects. And then from there, we build upon that. We'd say, okay, so now that you're comfortable, what do you want to do? And we build the infrastructure around that. So we've gone through a casting survey, made sure that people are comfortable with the characters that they're going to be portraying for this event. We've given them all the material that they need so that they can tell meaningful stories. We've given them connections to other characters so that they, can meet people and have social exchanges. And then, we'll encourage them. That's sort of like the next step up, is we'll encourage them to bring their own story, right? Because we're always thinking that the best stories are the ones that people have in their heads. So they say, it would be really great if, and that's where we want people to go. It would be really great if, and to bring that. And then we'll do our best to make that, a rewarding experience, certainly safe and inclusive, and, making sure that everybody feels comfortable with it, but fundamentally that it fits in and it can really enhance the overall event.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's what I find so fascinating, right? The sort of as you put it, the LARPcation element of it, the being able to kind of go away somewhere. I mean, it reminds me in many ways of the is it David Fincher movie, The Game, where you're, paying for this whole sort of elaborative experience of getting to watch the world end, which I don't know. I'm down. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, you should come.
We have an interesting now. Well, someone's putting you to the test with your LARP history. Someone wants to know when the first sort of historical LARP masquerade ball with people portraying characters may have been. Do you have an idea? What the full history of LARP kind of originates?
Yes, my understanding is that LARP predates tabletop role-playing game. The sort of basis of wargaming and tabletop role-playing game with Dungeons and Dragons and all those is that I think it might have been Gygax or maybe it was one of those other sort of like core personalities who were involved in that. They ran a event at a convention where people played members of, I think, of a town, right? Maybe it was a Bavarian town or something like that. And it was an unusual experience because they did this prior to what was going to be the actual tabletop wargaming part of this. And I think there's supposed to be a burgermeister and the sheriff and the reeve and all that kind of stuff. There's all these different people.
Sort of like a one-night werewolf.
Sort of, yeah. And whatever came out of this, I think it was maybe a town meeting, actually impacted what was going to be the wargaming component. So, they kind of did a LARP and they, played these characters, and then the outcome of that informs how their war game went. And I think that was the very first LARP, as far as I know, as far as might be documented. And it predates the, tabletop role-playing experience that we are now familiar with. But some of what came out of that was the enthusiasm of people who participated and went, that was amazing. We want to do this again. And I think Gygax and some of the other major personalities really kind of seized upon that and said, we've got something here. This is cool. We want to do this again. So as far as I know, that's the very first LARP.
No, I think that definitely sounds like sort of the modern LARP. I've always sort of hoped that LARP kind of, took its at least some of its DNA from the medieval masks, the old, I'm talking 14th century kind of mummers things, they're sort of half dance, half stage choreographed, but also there was an element of gambling and royalty dressed as, the common folk, and common folk as royalty. Like Henry VIII was big into this sort of stuff, you know, and you know, I think a lot of this ties into, you know, the blending of theater and entertainment, and I don't know. I feel like there's a long history of people wanting to dress up and play and pretend in a sort of a formalized, structured way. And I have to, if there's no real connection, I have to hope that sort of the same part of the reptile brain is being stimulated with these two distinct kind of entertainment modes across history.
I would have loved to see some of those early experimental forms. And I always wonder about that is, you know, what's been lost, you know, as far as history is concerned for this kind of experience. Like maybe there were games before H.G. Wells. Maybe there were LARPs before Gygax. I mean, I don't know, but I would love to cast that lens back on history and see what people were doing.
Caligula probably had something to do like this, right? I mean, that seems like his kind of jam.
Absolutely.
Someone is saying perhaps the interactive murder mystery dinners, which I definitely had a lot of friends who did those, or shows that, you know, there are shows that kind of have a kind of choose your own adventure quality, right? Where based on what the audience says or reacts, there's like different outcomes. I had a friend, I was doing a Fringe Festival show, and a friend of mine was doing something like this kind of choose your own play. And she was the stage manager, and she showed me her binder of trying to like figure out what to call depending on like if the audience did this, then she had to like call this light. And if they didn't do this, then she had to make sure this cue went off on the right time. I was like, oh, it's one of these things that like seems like a fun idea at the time, but then no, there has to be someone actually organizing it on the back end, or it's all going to fall apart.
Yeah, it's I mean, there's all sorts of very cool things going on in immersive theater. And, you know, I think one of the benefits that we have right now is that we can refer to similar analogs and say like it's murder mystery, or, you know, if you're in the sort of New England area, you know, about some of the things that are going on here. Geez, what's it called? There's a Shakespeare event that happens in New York, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's slipping the tongue here. But yeah, you walk through these sort of rooms, and the intent is that you're supposed to immerse yourself in that theatrical performance.
Well, escape rooms, you know, have also
very similar.
Have done this like, you know, sort of quasi gaming, you know, bringing it into the real world. Again, blurring those lines in interesting ways. Yeah, you know, someone again, you know, who's done a lot of tabletop. There are times when tabletop gets very intense, and you do feel like you have been transported. But I mean, that's very different from literally being on an island that, you know, in the costume that you've, you know, picked out, making all that work. Now, is this based on any kind of system? Like, is there kind of a mechanics? Like, you know, as a gamer, I have to know, like, you know, what are the rules? Like, is there a sort of a rules underpinning, or is it sheer improv and consensus and just hope that everyone plays nicely?
So we're lucky that we get to build on a tradition of safety and consent. We are systemless. We have no like core mechanic. The real core mechanic we have is belief. And that's really just a way of, you know, deciding an outcome. So people believe as their characters the outcome that they want, the story they're interested in for that character, and that's the mechanic. But we will provide in workshops, which are essential. Like workshops, I cannot stress how great they are. They are a pre-game mechanic that happens where everybody comes in, and we guide everyone through consent and safety and calibration techniques. And you know, a lot of this is informed out of things that work, and people have, you know, really kind of tested these things very well. They, you know, give you mechanics to make sure that people are okay. You know, if they're really kind of like having what looks like an intense experience, you know, you can check in and make sure they're fine, and they're, you know, they're just role playing rather than having some kind of panic attack. And, you know, we want to make sure that everybody's safe. So that's a core part of this is you have to make sure that everybody feels safe and that everybody has an equal amount of space and that they can navigate this in the way that is interesting to them. So Eskhaton is built upon those principles. We want people to be safe and comfortable, but then we also provide them some amount of, you know, cooperative or collaborative storytelling mechanics. So, we do have some rules in there for if you want to cast magic, right? Now, the interesting thing is you can do, like, say, an evil eye at somebody, but they accept it or don't. It's up to them. And they can decide for whatever reason what it is and whether, it has an effect. And once you take that element out, it actually kind of puts a lot of people at ease who are kind of worried about the mechanics coming in. I think once you introduce mechanics in a game system, people look for the way to make it work for them because they're worried that somebody's going to make it work for the other person and, kind of influence you based on what they want rather than what you want. So at the very basis of this is a consent aspect. And it works out amazing. I mean, I've seen some very convincing fights, some very convincing arguments or conflicts that, I think would normally be avoided because people are sort of like in their head playing out like, okay, I can do this much damage. I have this many hit points. It just removes all of that and allows people to just freely move through the space without running into too many of those barriers of like worrying about what they need to keep in mind for a mechanic.
And do you have to sort of have kind of NPCs on hand to kind of like run in and kind of guide things? Or is there just sort of a guy in a black t-shirt who acts as referee? How does that element get kind of played with?
So we are very focused on immersion. And what we have written in is this sort of creepy family called the Allertons. And they're sort of an ancestral like subcult of like, Providence elites, and they dress up in cultist robes, and they're not important, right? They're like, secondary. Like the cultists, the participants are really the characters that matter. But these people are available. When we sort of say like, oh, you see like this person in a robe, they're an Allerton, and they're an NPC. They're there for whatever purpose you need them to be. They'll be mingling around, and mostly their job is to say set up or break down scenes, right? But they're there to not break immersion and really kind of make the experience very, fluid for people. But if you ever need anybody, they're there, right? And they could just be standing around and be like, I need this person to go do a task for me or to go talk to the game organizing staff because I need some water. Like they're always there. They're always available. And we really want to like just put those kinds of characters out there for utility purpose. We don't necessarily want, unless somebody requests it, an NPC who comes in that steals focus for a scene. We want the participants to feel like they're the center of the attention. We want them to feel like they're important and they can do things and make reality come into the vision they have in their head.
And I guess, again, logistically, is there someone who's sort of keeping track on sort of what's happening story-wise, like secretly texting, okay, Steve just went insane. Mary just died. Is that kind of back and forth also taking place so that people are sort of aware of what the state of the game is?
Well, I think if you are a participant, you're really only focused on your experience and you just see or hear what's in front of you or around you. For the game organizers, we'll have a sort of central headquarters that people can come. They need to rest, or if they need to communicate with the game staff, or if they want to set up a scene, like all that is going to be available. People will die, but it's consensual. They decide when they die. So it's never like somebody's like, well, you're dead and you're out of the game. It's always more about what that participant wants out of the experience. So if they're like, yes, I want to have this glorious end and I want to, disappear off into the mists or be sacrificed or something. Okay, fine, and we'll find a way for the person to continue having a good time, because that's really what it comes down to. Is it's got to be fun and it's got to be safe, but we want it to be rewarding. And yes, we'll have like sort of a nexus where information is shared. We'll have like a big like whiteboard with like all the stuff that's going on, and probably people who are running in and out with different bits of information. But to the participant, you're not going to see that. I think what you're going to see is this world come to life around you that you are a part of, and that you are also kind of making happen. So that's kind of what you would have if you came to this.
Are you working your way up to the Truman Show style hidden cameras and like 18 monitors that you're manipulating as you go through this whole thing?
Maybe one day.
Someone's saying this all feels very Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, it does have a little bit of that feel. We're kind of pleasing those elder gods, and making the show enjoyable.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because you're very clear about how this is Lovecraftian inspired, Lovecraftian adjacent, but not Lovecraftian itself. As someone who dresses up like H.P. Lovecraft and attends a lot of conventions, who sees the 800 Kickstarter for Cthulhu board games and Nyarlathotep card games and Brown Jenkin tube socks. Lovecraft is a brand. It is I joke that Cthulhu is the sort of McDonald's arches of the horror world. And for good or for ill, it's a very branded thing for something that is essentially in the public domain. There's a gray area or green area, depending on how you think of it. So why was it that you guys decided to not kind of, have the cult of Nyarlathotep and the cult of Azathoth and, these things that people can readily be like, oh, I know that, I have buy-in, I am already invested. Why did you choose instead to kind of file off the serial numbers and go in this new direction?
Well, I think there's something resonant in the cosmic horror fiction style, and we're not saying that the things that make what a Lovecraftian story or sort of a mythos related story interesting. We're not saying we want to get away from that, but we do want to get away from like what you just talked about, the brand. That's one reason. I think you see a lot of iterations of like Cthulhu, and we didn't want to repeat that because, well, I mean, it's a pretty well-mined territory.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily want to dwell in mined territory. I like to try and come up with original material and work with people who see that and want to sort of latch onto that and develop stories that are different, maybe kind of adjacent, but different. And another reason is like Lovecraft himself. We want to make sure that this kind of experience is accessible and inclusive. And, that means getting away from some of the racist elements of Lovecraft. He's not someone that we want to necessarily emulate. We just want to say, well, we're talking about cosmic horror. That means we also have to talk about Lovecraft. And to a certain extent, we don't want to tell Lovecraft stories, but we do want to tell Lovecraftian inspired stories. So that's kind of the take we went with. We sort of had like a design session initially, and we said, well, maybe we could keep some of that. Maybe we could keep, Yog-Sothoth or something like that. Well, okay, no. We need an analog, but we don't need Yog-Sothoth. It is, a being that represents certain things. So, okay, we'll move in the direction of what Yog-Sothoth might be. And people can read into that and say, oh, that's what I like. Those are the stories that I like. I want to participate in that. But we don't necessarily want to go down that road of retelling a Yog-Sothoth story.
What other inspirations did you guys have? I mean, were you going kind of into the real sort of back canon of like, Blackwood and Robert Chambers and stuff like that? Or were you really trying to kind of go from the hip and sort of invent as you went along?
Yeah. So again, the core experience is playing a cultist, portraying a person who typically is, not the focus, not the hero. And we're not saying these are heroes per se, but they are people, and they have complex backgrounds. Nobody just becomes a cultist, right? They have a path that leads up to that. So we would want to instead say, okay, so what kind of human being encounters this dimensional evil, and then either chooses to worship it or at least acknowledges it as having an impact or effect on the world. And we don't want to assume the very worst. We want to actually kind of say, well, these people get up and go to work. They, have relationship struggles. They, have friendships that sometimes, mean a lot to them. We don't necessarily want to, paint them as just faceless evil. And I think we did that because it's challenging. It's not an easy story to tell. And also it allows people to, create some amount of empathy in a sense, because, they're talking about these, much more dimensional aspects of our own lives. And we think it can be rewarding. We think there can be an enriching experience. And then we as a design studio, like to look at what are hard stories. So, Seance Sessions is about the supernatural, sort of the spiritual, and it deals with elements of death. Whether people choose to explore that or not is up to them. And then ACOG is very difficult because it deals with what is potentially a world-ending scenario and how do you move forward from that point. So I think Eskhaton takes a similar tack, and we wanted to tell a story like that, and we needed to find something that we thought would be different and interesting.
No, it looks like you guys have definitely stumbled upon that. I do have to ask, when I hear about competing Eskhatons, my mind goes to China Miéville's Kraken. Did that in any way inform any of this, or was that completely off y'all's radar?
I have read it. I do know China Miéville, but it was not a component for why we did this, or wasn't really incorporated into our design.
Well, that's really cool. I'm really excited to hear more about this and hear how it goes. What's sort of your process from here on out? Are you guys still in the writing phase, designing phase, or kind of where are you? Because you got a few months now.
Yep. So we just released a participant guide, which is about a 80-page document with really kind of, it's about 19 pages of material that explains what the Eskhaton event is, what you need to know. And then the rest of it is all just fluff. It's all fun stuff. It tells you about the world. It gives you more information. And we're going to release 5 cult guides that, if you are the type of person that wants to read it all, you can. Or if you just want to read about one particular cult, it's really just fiction. It's like a collection of fiction. And after that, the people who are coming, we will be delivering to them a survey, which allows them to tell us what they want out of the experience. We will design custom characters from the ground up and say, you want to play this? Okay, great. Then we'll make it happen. We will then write characters, and these are going to be multi-page, in-depth characters with a lot of connections and motivations and those kinds of things. And that will happen in the fall. And then the final characters will be delivered in early 2019. So we're thinking like January, February. Give people plenty of time to get their costumes together and make sure that they, connect with people that are a part of their group, plan awesome scenes, and get everything in line, and then they show up and we make it happen.
And now, is your process really to focus on one at a time, or do you begin to sort of start looking at other events, and while you're running previous ones? Like at this point, are you guys able to sort of multitask like that, or is it really just here's our project at hand, we're going to see this through, and then start on the next one after?
Well, yeah, we've done a number of different things. Right up until about a month ago, we were working on a collaboration with about 5 other studios that do sort of similar LARP design. And this was a high-level games convention, which is a convention that came out of a podcast called High Level Games. And they ran a convention in Atlantic City, and they hosted a number of LARP studios that came in. They, each of them, us included, ran a marquee event, which was our own LARP and with our own players. But then we all collaborated on this sort of like mega LARP. And that was sort of what we were doing for the past couple of months. So we did that in the same, channel as also writing Eskhaton and getting ready for this. So we do take on different tasks. We're probably going to get into Intercon, which is coming up it's actually in Warwick, Rhode Island. And it's a LARP convention. So we're going to submit something and run something there. And we'll do things in between and after. So, it's really just as opportunities arise where we think we have a good chance, we'll work on doing things. And then we're also starting a new enterprise called Reverie Presents. It is based in Boston, and it's geared towards people who might be curious. They want to come and do like one of these like parlor LARPs, which is like sort of a short, contained LARP experience. It's sort of like a murder mystery dinner party, but it can be like any number of different things. And we run those like usually once a month. They're by different LARP writers. So there's like all sorts of people out there that write these amazing LARP concepts. And we just take them and run them. So people have an opportunity to sort of like explore and do these like different cool concepts.
That sounds really exciting. Since you are in Providence, like, are you also going to try to work in some of the, Lovecraftian landmarks? I know there's just a lot of different arts communes and groups within Providence that this is the stuff, the air they breathe. Are you working in collaboration with them, or for now, are you kind of focused in your own world?
No, we've reached out. We're actually talking to Necronomicon.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we're going to be working with them. There are some folks that I know that are involved in sort of like the burner community. So the people who put together these like cool, interactive, engaging experiences, and we want to like incorporate them somehow. And I think you'll see that come out at the event. That we'll actually build some very interesting displays or performances. And then we also had a great guide that was put together by somebody who lives in Providence, that's working with us. And she put this together just because she felt it was fun, but it lists like tourist attractions and great places to eat and all that. So that's actually going to go up on our website, I think within the next day or so. And we want to encourage people, if they can, to come and actually see Providence and like stay longer if they have the opportunity, to really kind of like immerse themselves and visit Providence rather than just come and do the event and then leave. So yeah, we're doing what we can for outreach, and certainly we're always interested in collaborating. So that's going to be like a big push for us, is really getting everybody on board to make this as broad of an experience as possible.
And for anyone viewing, if they have now been bitten by the bug, what's their next step? Where should they go from here?
Well, if they're interested, we have a Facebook page, and it's just Eskhaton, so Eskhaton. So you'll be able to see that, or Eskhaton LARP. Then we also have, of course, our webpage, which is eskhatonlarp.com. And from there, you can read about what we're doing. And then there's an apply button. So if you're actually interested in coming, we'd love to have you. If you've never LARPed before, we definitely want you, because we love new people. And if you're an experienced or veteran person, also definitely show up, because I think you're gonna find this to be an amazing experience. And just follow us, see what we're up to, and certainly if you want, read the guide. Again, it's like 70 pages, but it's good. I swear. So it's fun material, and we're very excited to do some new work with some folks.
Well, this sounds exciting. I really hope folks follow up on this, and we're going to be interested to follow on and see where you guys go from here, because this is really ambitious and really exciting. And if nothing else, people should be able to have some decent clams out there.
And I'm happy if anybody ever wants to reach out to me. I'm glad to talk. So just go ahead and give me an email. It's Garett, Garett @reverie.studio. I'm very social and friendly, so just reach out to me and talk, and I'm happy to hear from you.
That's fantastic. Well, Garett, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you everyone watching. This has been Ask Lovecraft After Dark. If you're interested in Ask Lovecraft, you can watch me impersonating H.P. Lovecraft 3 times a week over at asklovecraft.com. If you want to find out about live shows that I'm going to be involved with, or different articles going on, you can go to lehmankessler.com. And if you just want to watch me screaming into the void that is the internet, you can follow me on Twitter @LehmanKessler. If you would like to be part of these live shows, please join the Facebook group, the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society, a fine group of attractive and discerning people. But thank you so much for watching. We're excited about seeing what happens with this LARP. So Garett, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Lehman.
All right. I hope the rest of you have a wonderful night, and we'll see you in a fortnight. Bye, all.
Take care.